هل ما زال التاريخ يعد مساحة للتحدث عن الماضي بصدق، أم أصبح منظومة للتورية وإخفاء وطمس حقيقة الأمس؟ وما علاقة ذلك بالصراع العربي الإسرائيلي؟ وهل ما زالت حملات المقاطعة وسحب الاستثمارات وفرض العقوبات على إسرائيل تأتي أكلها؟ مع جلعاد أتزمون من الداخل، معكم زينب صفار، تابعونا. هو الرجل الذي سلب الألباب بموسيقى آلة الساكسفون وبمقطوعاته وتوليفاته الموسيقية الفريدة، وأغضب الكثيرين بآرائه ومواقفه السياسية والفكرية الفريدة أيضاً. هو جلعاد أتزمون، الجندي الاسرائيلي السابق الذي دخل أول مرة إلى لبنان إلى معتقل أنصار محتلا عام 82، وها هو يعود إليها عازف ساكسفون وكاتبا سياسيا أنكر أي انتماء لإسرائيل وأثار عليها وهجرها وتخلى عن جنسيته وفضل العيش في بريطانيا وحمل جنسيتها ونصب العداء لإسرائيل وقاوم على طريقته مع الفلسطينيين. جلعاد عاد إلى أرض الجنوب المحرر ليشهد على حقبة كان هو جزء منها.
This is basically very similar to what I saw in Ansar. I think that this is the ultimate form of cruelty. And it is very embarrassing for me that the people who are engaged in such cruelty used to be my people, but I'm aware of it and I write about it.
جاء أتزمون ليشاركنا آراءه وأفكاره السياسية والفلسفية الحديثة المثيرة للجدل، والتي دفعت الكثيرين من كل الجهات إلى مهاجمته من اليمين وحتى اليسار. هو اليوم يحدثنا عن حقبة من الإخفاء في الأحداث التاريخية التي تتحمل مسؤوليتها كل الجهات، ويطلعنا على قوة تغلغل اللوبي الإسرائيلي في السياسة البريطانية في مفاصل عدة، ويناقش جدوى حركة المقاطعة وسحب الاستثمارات وفرض العقوبات على إسرائيل. Controversial political writer and international jazz artist, Mr. Gilad Atzmon, welcome to The Inside and welcome at Al Mayadeen. Well, sir, you say that history is regarded as an attempt to talk genuinely about the past, yet, however, it is also a system of concealment. Who do you mean by this? What do you mean by this? And how is it related to Israel?
To start with, it is related to all of us. We tend to believe that history is an attempt to tell us what really happened. But in fact, all it does for real is trying to tell us what we can deal with. History is a clear system of concealment of all those things we feel shame about. Mm-hmm. We cannot really cope with. We can't even utter to ourselves. In order to conceal those events or cultural aspects, we present a glorious narrative that locates somehow chronologically all those events we are either proud of or can clearly deal with. As such, history is very similar to the unconscious mind. It's basically a system of repression. And if we look in different cultures and different historical narratives, we would immediately find out.
How is it related to Israel in this sense?
It is Israel or Jewish culture or Zionist narrative or even Jewish anti-Zionist narrative are somehow surrounded around the shame of being Jewish and what it means. For instance, there is an embarrassing fact. The Jews, all along their history, were hated by the people around them. Zionism was there to solve this problem. Zionism was there to take the Jews from Europe, where they were hated, and to schlep them to their promised land, which was actually Palestine. Zionism, as such, was a clear admission that there was something wrong with Jewish identity in the diaspora and so on. And as such, it is a very unique moment in Jewish history. They admitted that we, the diaspora Jews, are parasites. We live on the expense of others. We interfere in other people's politics. We are not productive. We are traders, usurers, and so on and so on. And they say, but it's not our fault. It's because we don't live on our land. And then they invented this promised land narrative, and they celebrate their symptoms on the expense of the Palestinian people. However, even Zionism lost its edge.
But you know, Zionism is not only related to the Jews, but there are others who are Zionists.
We can talk about Christian Zionists. I think that it's a completely different narrative,
Notion, yes.
A completely different narrative, and it is a very interesting narrative, and it obviously predates Jewish Zionism. However, as Zionism evolved, as Israel was founded, and Jews around the world became Zionists at large, Zionism also became a system of concealment of Jewish past. And the main question is, again, why are they hated? They had a chance to open a new page in their history, to become part of the land. Instead, when we look at Israel, yesterday we drove near to the border, it is surrounded by barbed wire.
And by cement.
And by cement.
Walls.
By barbed wire and cement walls. They actually recreated the Jewish ghetto walls, which they were supposed to drift away from. And it happened to them because they cannot really face those elements within their culture that make them hated. And what are those elements? For instance, chosenness. The fact that they see themselves as superior. The fact that they see themselves as people who have more to celebrate than any other people.
Who is it to blame here for this kind of culture, this kind of feeling, this kind of attitude?
It is very important for me to say that this issue of concealment is not unique to Zionism. Palestinians also have a lot to conceal.
Yeah. How?
European.
What? Can you give us an example?
Okay, so when it comes to Palestinians, for instance, they have some things that they may be also embarrassed about. It is not clear or it demands an explanation, what really happened in Palestinian histories or in Palestinian communities that made them blind or so blind to the waves of immigrations of Jews from late 19th century. Those Jews, Zionist Jews, were accumulating weapons. At a certain stage, it was clear that they want to take the land. The betrayal of the Palestinian upper classes who were selling the lands and then disappeared from the land with a lot of money. The betrayal of Arab countries.
Did they just sell their lands like that, or were they forced by certain sides to sell their lands?
This is a subject to historical research. Mm-hmm. Rather than providing answers, I would like to talk about what is happening and what is it that we try to suppress. Mm-hmm. However, the Palestinian struggle, now we can talk about more than 110 years, and this concealment is evolving and growing, and eventually we end up with Ramallah being the Palestinian NGO capital, and it takes us few years to realize that most of those NGOs are actually funded by liberal Zionists like George Soros, or European Union, or even the United States government, that lead to the complete dismantling of Palestinian resistance. Because if you support your people the way you should as an NGO, you would be immediately identified as a terrorist.
You also talk about how this concealment is also related to the British. How?
The fact that the British cannot deal with their genocidal past is totally obvious. One of the most fascinating examples is that if you go to the British Imperial War Museum, one of the most astonishing facts that instead of having exhibitions, constant exhibitions or showrooms that would invite you to look at British self-reflecting on their own colonial massacres around the world, they put an exhibition of Nazi Holocaust. So rather than dealing with themselves, looking in the mirror, looking at themselves being the murderers, they point at other murderers. This is obviously a system of concealment now. This is very crucial.
Give me one last example, but quickly, if I may ask, before we go to the break.
What is more interesting is that British let Martin Gilbert, a Zionist Jew, to write their history. But when it comes to Palestinian Nakba, it is Ilan Pape provide us with the tale, the West with the tale of Palestinian suffering for some reason. And even I am here, I'm an ex-Jew, telling you the story. Because
you're an ex-Israeli and an ex-Jew.
An ex-Israeli and an ex-Jew.
And they say that you are a self-hating Jew and anti-Semite, and you say that, well, I'm okay with the first label, but I strongly object to the second one.
Exactly, but what I'm saying, it is interesting that Jews didn't write history for 2,000 years. And now, not only that we write the history of ourselves, we invented the history of ourselves, as Shlomo Zahn rightly suggests, we also write the history of everyone else, including our supposed enemies.
Right, Gilad, we're going to stop now for a short break, and then when we come back, we'll talk a bit about how the Israel lobby is controlling the UK internal and external politics. The Insight will be back after the break. Stay with us. Welcome back to The Inside with controversial political writer and international jazz artist, Mr. Gilad Atzmon. Gilad, before the break, you were talking about how the system of concealment works. How is it related to Israeli militarism?
One of the things that Israelis talk to themselves and share with us often enough is their obsession with power of deterrence. Again, in order to maintain the power of deterrence, Israelis are willing to kill as many people as the military power allows them.
And they resort to collective punishment.
Collective punishment, they throw cluster bombs on civilians, they use white phosphorus and so on, we know about it. But this power of deterrence is again a form of concealment of the repressed acceptance that they are actually a bunch of cowards. When Auschwitz was liberated, Jews were left with the devastating idea that they were sent to the crematoriums, and I don't go into the historicity of it now, as lumped to the slaughter. And they say, in Israel, in our Jewish state, in Zion, we won't be cowards again. And this is why power of deterrence is so important for them. But interestingly enough, they are very good in throwing bombs from airplanes,
but not in
the
ground assault.
They realized after Lebanon in 2006 that they cannot deploy their infantry, because the infantry, the Israeli man, soldier, is a coward. And when they entered Lebanon in 2006 and they encountered opposition, they ran into houses and begged for air support.
It was a complete defeat with the ground assault.
A complete defeat. And now in the last operation, they recruited a massive ground force. They called for all their reserve, and they were not brave enough to use it.
But you say in one of your articles that they accepted the bid of Palestine at the UN. Why?
Yes, in fact they didn't formally accepted it. But
one way or another, they just turned a blind eye to it.
Yeah, we are entering now an issue of Jewish power in the West. But let's talk about, this is a very good, the Palestinian bid for a state, I think is a very, it gives us an opportunity to look into this Israeli versus Jewish lobby. Israel's most devastating fear is demography. Demography is not good for the Jews. Why? Because they realize that the Palestinians are becoming the majority, and they are already the majority, on the land from the river to the sea. This is why late Sharon, invented the unilateral disengagement. This is why Israel really wants to state, because this is the only way for itself to maintain the notion of a Jewish state with a Jewish majority. This is why Israelis, and I believe Israeli government, was actually pretty positive about the Palestinian bid. But the Jewish lobby in America wasn't sure about it at all. They want a big Israel, a big Jewish state. They don't mind that the Palestinians keep living in concentration camp, in the big open air prisons. They just want the Jewish state to be as big as it could. And what we saw there was a conflict between Israel and the Jewish lobby that doesn't represent the Israeli interest. It represents the interests, what some people understand as the Jewish tribal interests. Obama's administration was stuck in the middle of it. and they were very confused, and they didn't know what to do.
Let us talk here a bit about the UK.
Yeah.
How deep is this lobby's influence in the UK politics with unseen negative effects on the British society?
To start with, we have the facts. 80% of British Conservative MPs are CFI members. They are members of the Conservative Friends of Israel. The same applies to the Labour. 80% of them, or around 80%, are LFI members, Labour Friends of Israel. Now, the most embarrassing question for the British people, you know, they see that 80% of their parliament members or the leading party are are friends of a racist, expansionist state, yet it is not clear how many members of their parliament are friends of Liverpool or Glasgow or York. So what we see is a classic case of intervention of Israeli or even Jewish tribal intervention within British politics. And by the way, this is not very surprising, because as far as Jewish culture is concerned, this is exactly the message of a very important book, the Book of Esther in the Bible, that teaches the Jews how to intervene, how to interfere with foreign administrations and to make them serving the tribal interest.
How did it come to have such power in the UK?
This is a very big question. I think that unlike America, where those issues are discussed openly, and we can we can refer to James Petras and to Mearsheimer and Walt. Books have been written about it. Funny enough, when you think about Mearsheimer and Walt, the first publication of the work on the Israeli,
the Israeli lobby and the
in
US
America
foreign policy
was published in Britain. Yet, the Guardian in Britain, that should stand as a guardian of truth and justice, wouldn't touch the British,
the lobby's control,
the Jewish British lobby in the UK. There is very little work on this subject.
Why do you think so?
Because
is it also related to concealment?
Because one thing that for sure, but one thing that the British lost is their authenticity, and this is due to the fact that they really adopted the notion of political correctness without really understand what it is and what it is for. What is political correctness? Political correctness is again system of concealment. Political correctness is politics, clear politics, that doesn't allow political opposition. And Jews located themselves at the center of it. And what it means is that their politics is not challenged, and it is very embarrassing, because this is very dangerous for the Jews more than anyone else.
Right. Allow me here to move on to the BDS movement, the boycott, divestment and sanctions.
Yes.
Why was it founded back in 2005? What was it in reaction for? And did it achieve what it aspired to achieve up till now? And why is Gilad Atzmon so much attacked by the BDS? Because some consider it to be something, an aspect that is very strong, and it's even stronger than the Palestinian uprising, according to certain Israeli think tanks.
Yeah.
And however, Norman Finkelstein says that it's a cult, and Noam Chomsky considers that it's hypocrisy rising to high heavens.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
My take on BDS is different from both Chomsky and Finkelstein. I think that the idea is great. I think that putting pressure on Israel through economy is a very clever thing to do. Yet,
is it because of the political failure? Was it in reaction to the political failure?
Maybe, but it is something that people can understand. People can understand that it is not right to buy products, you know, in your food store that were produced in an apartheid. I don't see Israel as apartheid. I think it's far worse. In a racist, chauvinist state. Mm-hmm. This is very clear. However, the success on that front is maybe limited because I learned a few months ago that the trade between Israel and the UK, for instance, and we are living at the time in a huge financial crisis, doubled. So BDS didn't achieve a lot in that front, but it achieved a lot in presenting its case, and people are aware. So there is more a political awareness of amongst the people of the crimes that are committed by Israel. I have difficult, and this is from since 2005, and I mentioned it in 2005, with BDS take on academic and cultural boycott. I believe that suppression of freedom of speech is something that is very problematic, and the last thing that I want to see is Palestinians getting themselves involved in harem culture, which is a Jewish culture of boycotting of freedom of speech. If we have an image of Palestine, one Palestine, as a tolerant, pluralist place, like your country is to a certain extent. We spoke about it yesterday, about freedom. In Lebanon, the last thing that we want to do is to silence people. I believe that Zionists should be able to say what they want to say, because I know that we have the answers.
Right. Allow us to stop now because time has run short, but we promise our audience that we're going to be hosting Gilad Atzmon to talk more about your different ideas, your controversial ideas concerning the BDS, concerning the jazz and jihad, and concerning the Israel lobby control over the UK politics. Mr. Gilad Atzmon, controversial political writer and international jazz artist, thanks a million for joining us. Yes. إذن لقاء جديد في الأسبوع المقبل مع ضيف جديد وقضية جديدة ودائما من الداخل. للمزيد من التواصل بريدونا theinside@almayadeen.net. Again, theinside@almayadeen.net. إلى اللقاء.